Kevin Gordon here from Autosavant.com, bringing you our installation of the Kicker Soundgate Powerstage factory stereo upgrade for 2009 and newer Ford F-150 Super Cruise without the Sony stereo upgrade. So a bit of a mouthful there. It's the Kicker Soundgate Powerstage factory stereo upgrade. So Kicker's sort of plug and play upgrade for factory stereos for 2009 and newer Ford F-150 Super Cruise that don't have the upgraded stereo with the Sony sub. Kicker has a few different options with their stereos for both Super Cruise and Super Cabs. You can buy it with the Intercept amplifier like this one has that re-amplifies all of the in-car speakers that exist. The system that we have retails for $1,249. It's complete plug and play, no cuttings required, and of course, because it's from Kicker, you get a very nice and solid subwoofer. So this system you can buy without the Intercept amplifier, which we had the chance to experience at SEMA last year in Kicker's factory Camaro upgrade. And we were so impressed with their DSP, or digital signal processor, that we really pushed to go for the full Soundgate Powerstage system.
So it is about 9 o'clock in the morning, brisk fall morning here in eastern Pennsylvania, and we're going to go through, document the install, let you know how it goes, and then see how it listens when it's done. So step one appears to be to put the truck in the on position so that you can move the shifter to neutral with the parking brake on. Then you just pull up on the center console here and the whole thing just pops right out. So next up is just to go through, disconnect the negative side of the battery terminal, the truck in park, so now there's no power running to anything in the truck, and loosen up this little flap here, and you can see I've got a panel removal tool, though the reality is you could probably use a screwdriver. It works just fine. Under here there's two screws that we're going to take out to start to get this panel off. Alright, next thing to happen is those top two screws up here come out. Those are 7mm ratchet bolts, and the two down here come out. Those are 8mm ratchet bolts. And one of those other little things I like to do for these things is you take a piece of your box and you just cut little slit holes in it and stick your screws in there, and some people lay it out like a diagram of where they go. Instead, what I do is I just do them top to bottom in order of taking them out, assuming that assembly is going to be pretty much in the reverse order. Next thing here seems to be to go get some other panels out of the truck, so we'll be right back with that stuff. Alright, so I jumped ahead here a couple of steps. The two bolts that are down at the front of the console we pulled out, as well as the bolt that lives here on both sides of the console. This panel, which was up here before, it just pops off. You just get your finger underneath it and pull, pops right out. At the back of the console, which we can't see because the power seats are there, there's two more of these that are at the back. So you got to pull the rear seats all the way forward. You got to push the front seats all the way forward, which means if you have power seats like we do, you got to reconnect the battery, push those always forward to get those bolts out. After that, what you're able to do is actually pull the whole center console backwards in one big unit, which gets you access to the little screws that are right here, which means that this trim piece now can start to come off, as it's going to need to, I think, for the next step. So, all in all, pretty follow step by step along at this point. I think the one thing that's been interesting is the fact that all the bolts that hold all this stuff together are different sizes. So it's a bit of a game to go through and figure out what the right ratchet is for each one of them. Alright, moving right along. Once we get the center console stuff done, you'll see I actually fully removed the panel on the left where the air vent is. Just requires unclipping the four-wheel drive selector, and that comes all the way out, which loosens that whole thing up. The next one is you go over and you push in the tabs on the glove box and let that fold all the way down. And then underneath here, I'll see if we can get an angle on it. You'll see these screws that are here, and once those three are out, it allows you to get in and actually pull the airbag out. What I found was, to get that started, I took a panel tool on this side and started to pry, and it just started to pop right out. So you've actually got to take this and pull it out to be able to get to a screw that's back here to be able to get this panel off, I believe. It's like after it's in, you can see the airbag's loose. There's a little trim panel screw right here that had to be removed, and then I took this panel all the way out, although I don't actually think you need to, but just to be able to see as much as we're doing as possible, I'm pulling the panels all the way off. And the last step appears to be is this, your aux mount. You can get a panel tool up under this sledge and twist a little bit, it pops out. And there's one more screw right there to remove, which should give us full access to pull this whole center console right out. So now once you get all that stuff loose, you can go through and disconnect all the harnesses. Most of them have little push clips on them you've got to go find and pull out. And then you'll see that you've got your total center console off, and you can get to the 4 bolts that are holding on the radio. And there we go, radio removed. You remove the 4 screws and pull out all the plugs from the back. The other thing I wanted to show you was all the screws that came out of the truck. So top of the stereo, front of the shifter column, front of the console, rear of the console, bottom front of the stereo trim, top of the stereo trim. You'll notice that the glove box screws I had actually taken out. They ran across the top of the glove box. I thought they were the airbag mount screws, but they weren't. So I actually put those back in. There's that little piece of the stereo trim that you need to take the airbag out and pull that for. This is the piece that holds in the aux panel, and finally the 4 screws that hold in the radio. So we've got all of our stuff here, right? Center console, console panel, radio, and all of our trim pieces out. And now it's time to move on to power routing for the actual stereo. It's one of those really nice features of owning a truck, especially F-150, is the fuse panel is right up at the front of the engine bay. And it has a big accessory terminal, so for any accessories you want to run, you can connect them here instead of having to go over and actually connect them to the positive side of the battery terminal. You'll notice that the Kicker system actually has 2 power wires, and that's because it has 1 amp for the speakers in the car and 1 amp for the subwoofer, and it actually runs power to them separately, I'm assuming to just ease installation. Alright, so now we've got our cord routed, running along the radiator support down the side, which we'll actually clean up with some zip ties. But I do want to see if I could show you guys the fact that there is a little rubber grommet that is, runs between the wires and the firewall. See if we can get that to zoom in. There we go. And there's a nub at the top of it there that you can cut into, which creates a path through the car. So if we run around and show you now this side, you'll see that the wires are coming through. A couple other things I did was, one, I wrapped some duct tape around the ends of these 3 wires that wind up being here so they'd be easier to pass through. And hanging off of this about here was a little clip that was zip tied on. So here's that clip. It was zip tied on, but didn't have any actual power running through it. So I clipped that off just to make it easier going through the firewall. So for the sub wire, at least the power wire for the amp, do about the same thing. Is route it through the truck, and then down in there we get another grommet, if we can get it to focus. Alright, and then that routes through that grommet and up underneath the fuse box of the passenger side. And this one's trickier to grab. It's up there quite a bit higher, and you can either remove just the factory fuse panel, which is here, or the full sort of kick panel as well. I figured I'd just remove it to get as much space in there as possible. And then of course the sill plate pops out just like the other one. For this one, we're going to have to run along the sill plate. We'll pop actually this piece up to get to the back, and all those pieces to start mounting the subwoofer.